Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to the 2022 race ratings for the Bahrain Grand Prix. So a very warm welcome to the Bahrain race ratings. As always, spoilers ahead if you've not seen or heard about the results from the past weekend. Also, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy and subscribe down below for more F1 content. Plus, do leave any feedback or suggestions in the comments, as then hopefully the series can get better with every race. Now, with those two things out of the way, let's get into it. Starting with the result, and it's Charles Leclerc in P1 with Sainz making it a Ferrari 1-2 and Lewis Hamilton completing the podium after the Red Bull engines just died in the last few laps. Looking at the race as a whole, I'd say it was pretty good for a season opener. We had fighting at the front and there were battles going on down the order. Importantly, it looked like the cars were better for racing, so that's a big plus. There was sort of a dull patch between Leclerc and Verstappen's battle until Gasly's car caught fire. But yeah, overall a decent race, and then the late drama bumps it up to a good one. So I think for this week, I'm going to give it an 8, with about 6 being average, maybe just on the good side of average. Just something to bear in mind with the remaining ratings as well. So I planned to start with the team in last place in the Constructors, and after qualifying, I did not expect it to be Red Bull here. From the team's perspective, just a devastating finish to that race, with not one but 2 DNFs, both seemingly due to engine problems, I think fuel pump issues, so definitely not the start they'd want. For the drivers, I'll start with Verstappen, and overall I'd say it was a good performance from him, obviously very much overshadowed by the engine failing at the end, but that's not really his fault. The pace was good, he had a good distance ahead of Perez for pretty much the entire race, but the thing that I don't get is how, for the 3 laps in a row, when he was going at Leclerc, he did the same thing again and again, where he'd overtake him into turn 1, then get re-overtaken into turn 4. Surely after the second one, he'd realise it wasn't working, the Ferrari would just get him back. The other thing, which was a bit of a head scratcher, was on the safety car restart, where he decided to go right alongside Leclerc, and then because of the angle, he basically messed himself up and almost lost out to Sainz on the straight. But yeah, overall, I'm going to give him a 7.5. I think it was a good race from him, but definitely nowhere near any of the performances we've seen in the past, really. Moving to Perez, and again, the performance very much overshadowed by the final lap and the engine locking causing a spin at turn 1, but in terms of the race, lost a couple of places at the start, but made them up pretty quickly. I think it was generally where he's been in the past, sort of a decent chunk back from Verstappen, and was on for P4 before the issues. Managed his medium tyres well, and was generally running a few seconds back from Sainz, but never did quite look to be a threat to him. So I'd say 6.5 probably, about what I'd give. Again, 6 being average to good, but kind of what you'd expect performance-wise. Definitely don't think it was anything too special of a drive from him. Next up, McLaren, and just got to say, by far the most disappointing team. It pains me to say so, but their pace was just non-existent, which is a real shame. I'll start with Ricciardo, but honestly I don't have too much to say. He started on the mediums, lost a few places, then was just running towards the back for pretty much the entire race. Before the safety car was a fair bit back from Lando, but it's kind of hard to judge the performance of the drivers just because we don't know exactly where that McLaren is pace-wise, other than just towards the back. I don't have anything great really written down in the notes, so it's just going to be a 5. I think, again, at least for the first couple of races, we won't really know what a good performance is in that car, other than just comparing to their teammate. Then for Lando, it's a pretty similar story. Lost a place at the start on the mediums, then was generally towards the back, fighting with Albon but losing out. He was put onto the hards like Ricciardo, which in hindsight was just a bad decision from the team. I don't think anyone got the hards working well. So with the rating, better than Ricciardo, but still tricky to be confident with it, so I think a 6.5 will do. Ahead of his teammate and generally doing what he could. So Williams, and if I had to say, I guess their performance is about where they were last year, definitely at the back, maybe not the very worst, but maybe 8th, 9th or so. For drivers, I'll start with Latifi, and it just wasn't great from him. I'm pretty sure he was running in net last or second last place for the whole race, which just, not brilliant. Especially when Albon was up fighting other cars and generally up the road, so to be beaten pretty convincingly by a driver in their first F1 race in over a year, it's a 3.5 for him, maybe even a 3, but I'll stick with a 3.5 because it just definitely wasn't a good race. Then for Albon, definitely much better than Latifi, was battling with Bottas at the start, then the McLaren's mid-race, and was definitely much better pace-wise than the other Williams. Kind of like McLaren, it's tricky to know what a good performance is until we know the car's kind of exact position, but I'd say it was a good first race back, finished P13 in the end, so I think it'll be a 6.5, almost a 7, an above average race, but not otherworldly, definitely a solid performance to start the season. Next up, Aston Martin, and another disappointing team, one that came in with some potential and just seems to be so far off. They've got real porpoising issues as well, which means they have to run the ride height higher, which doesn't help these ground effect cars. Driver-wise, I'll start with Stroll, and actually, I think he did alright. Finishing 12th in the end was good, and as I said, if that's a car that really looks bad, then P12 is a good result. I'm not sure how great it is compared to Hülkenberg. On one hand, you'd like to think he'd beat his teammate who'd only been in the car from the start of practice, but then he was also out-qualified by Nico, so maybe the standard isn't too different between them. But still, 12th place, well ahead of your teammate and a number of other cars that look to be roughly at the same level, so I think overall I'd give it a 7, which maybe seems a little high, but ultimately I do think on the whole he's done well this race. Then with Hülkenberg, it's tricky. Obviously not much time in the car, which plays a part into his race performance. At the start, it was looking alright. He was in 15th, 16th, and then after the first set of pit stops was just at the back. And I want to say it may well have been a cooling problem as well, because I remember in the race hearing he couldn't pit because the car was too hot. So that may well have played a big part, but he still ended up last of the finishers. So I think it's going to have to be a 5. Not Latifi levels for sure, but I just get the sense that it could have been better. Moving to Alpha Tauri, and we have the first team with points, as they're now sitting P6 with 4 of them. And as a whole, the performance looks alright. I think they can definitely be pleased with that at least. Going to Gasly for the drivers, and what was looking like a solid performance until the car just caught fire. No warning for us viewers or anything, and then they just cut to the Alpha Tauri and the engine was up in flames. Which was a real disappointment, as until that point he was just solidly running in P8 for much of the race. Good pace, ahead of Tsunoda. My notes literally have nothing until lap 46 and just car on fire. So with that in mind, obviously didn't finish, but still probably did enough for a 7.5. He never really looked under threat from behind, and just drove a generally good race, good pace throughout. With Tsunoda, he did pick up points, 4 of them in P8 again. I think he had a good race, wasn't on the level of Gasly, but a solid performance. He managed to hold up Bottas for a number of laps, which is positive for him, and then obviously eventually finished inside the points. I don't think you could have asked too much more, so a 6.5 is probably where I put him. Can't really complain too much, but again, behind his teammate, not a performance that was amazing or anything. Next up, Alpine, and a decent start for both of them with cars in the points, and probably what is the 5th best car, maybe 6th, somewhere in that kind of middle range. I'll start with Ocon, who I would say had the better race of the 2 drivers. He did tap Schumacher on the opening lap and got a 5-second penalty for it, but despite that, finished a couple places above his teammate and was generally doing better pace-wise. Honestly, not too much to add, so I think I'm going to give him a 7. It might have been a 6.5, but it was a good drive overall. Did have the penalty, which he admitted was completely his fault, but in the end drove well enough that it didn't really cost him. Alonso, on the other hand, I don't think he has as good of a race. He started a little ahead, but came undone when he stopped for hard tyres, and like others, just couldn't really get them working. Plus, he didn't do himself any favours when he had a fairly big lock up into turn 10, which I can imagine going on to new tyres then just doesn't help you in that stint. Overall, I'm going to give him a 5.5, was definitely the Alpine car that was behind over the course of the race, although generally they were together for a lot of it, so the difference in the ratings isn't that huge, but still, definitely think Ocon got the better of Alonso this weekend. Moving on to Alfa Romeo, and after the first lap, I would not have said they'd be P4 in the Constructors come the end, and you'll see why in just a second. I think I'll start with Bottas, and probably the person I found hardest to rate in this, because on face value, P6 is a great finish, and he's had to make his way past some people to get there. But the reason he had to make his way past people was just an absolute shocker of a start. He dropped 8 places on the opening lap from 6th to 14th, and did struggle a little to get past Tsunoda. But overall, it's still a very good result, and so I'm going to give him an 8, which is definitely a good performance, but just thinking what it could have been if he hadn't messed up the start so badly. Then with Joe, it was a performance that I want to say is similar to Bottas in a way, where he was down to last by the first corner, but made his way back through over the course of the race and eventually picked up a point, which is a good result. You know, the only real notes I have for him are just sort of overtaking people. So I think I'm going to give him a 7. He did well to finish where he did and as a rookie on debut, but I don't think the performance was quite as good as the level of Bottas. Don't forget, from the back you're overtaking the slowest cars as well, but still an overall good result, I'd say. So now the top 3 teams, and who'd have thought Haas would be here? Even after they looked a bit better through practice and qualifying, I didn't think we'd have Haas P3 in the Constructors. Driver-wise, I'll start with Schumacher, who was definitely outdriven by his teammate, but still had a solid performance, I'd say. Was tagged by Ocon and sent into a 360 on the opening lap, but then eventually finished 11th, just off the points. But given where Magnussen finished in 5th, Schumacher gets a 6. It was what I put down as the average performance. You know, decently good drive, wouldn't complain, but also not near his teammate, so 6 is what he gets. And then talking of his teammate, Kevin Magnussen, what a return, without one of a doubt the drives of the day. Eventual finish of P5, and you can see how much joy that brings to the Haas team, and honestly, it's hard to complain about that. He had a great start, was up a couple of places, and then when he was eventually passed, settled into P7 really well, was running best of the rest for pretty much the whole race, and honestly wasn't crazy far behind the Mercedes pair. One small drawback would be that when defending into turn 1 a couple of times, he just completely outbroke himself, but ultimately that won't have cost him in the long run. So for K-Mag, gonna get the first 9, maybe an 8.5, but at the end of the day, Haas, P5, first race, well above his teammate in position and overall pace, so there's just nothing to really complain about. Next up, the Silver Arrows, and if you offered them a podium and P4 at the start, they'd have most definitely taken it. With the drivers, starting with Lewis, and overall I'd say it was a very good solid drive, made up a place at the start and on fresh tyres both in the first stint and the last stint, was able to keep pace with Sainz and Perez, who are definitely in superior cars. Mercedes did mess up a bit with the hard tyres, and the only very minor complaint in the race is him sliding about a bit when he first got them. I don't think you can blame him too much for that. Then come the end of the race, was looking to be challenging Perez. Obviously the Red Bull engine probably not performing fully before cutting out, but still, when things go wrong you have to be there to pick up the pieces, and so it's an 8. He was also ahead of George Russell fairly comfortably during the race, although the actual pace was similar-ish, so maybe it could be a 7.5, but honestly there really aren't any driver errors to highlight or complaints to be made. Then with Russell, again, it was a solid drive. He needed to make up places early, and he did. I think he was up to 7th by the end of the first lap, and then once into 6th behind Hamilton, just comfortably ran his race. After the second stop, he did drop back a little, so I'd definitely say he wasn't as good as Hamilton this weekend. I think it was 12 seconds before Hamilton pitted. That was just before the safety car. So it's between a 6.5 and a 7 for Russell. Think I'm going to go with a 7. Was definitely a solid performance, first one with the team as well. Again, like Hamilton, there aren't really any driver errors, and so other than just not quite being on Hamilton's pace for a stint or two, no real complaints. And then finally, Ferrari, who looked to have nailed the new regulations and taken the position at the top along with their first race win since Singapore 2019. I think I've got to start with Leclerc, and honestly, what a way to start the year. Obviously he won, but the performance all throughout the race was brilliant. Covered off Verstappen into the first corner, and then when Max did get a chance, played it to perfection. He said in an interview afterwards he knew exactly what he was doing. Once Verstappen looked like he was going to go down the inside, just made sure to get the DRS and take the lead back into turn 4. And from there, just looked in complete control, handled the restart well, and even in the few laps at the end, still finished like 5 or 6 seconds in front of Sainz, plus picked up the fastest lap. Pretty flawless, and so gets a 9. Pace was great, defence was great, and then came away with the win. You can't ask for much more. Then with Sainz, obviously he got P2 in the end, but was generally back from Leclerc and Verstappen the whole race, to me at least. He seemed very similar to Perez in a way, where it was good, but definitely could have been better, and he even said afterwards that he struggled pace-wise, which did look to be true. But still was comfortably ahead of Perez most of the race, so I'm going to give him a 7. Very solid, pretty good on the whole, but pace-wise just off Leclerc. So that rounds out the race ratings for Bahrain. As mentioned before, please do give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more F1 content, along with leaving your thoughts, feedback and suggestions down below. The feedback would be really appreciated on this one, just to improve the series as it goes along. But until next time, take care.